everybody. I call y'all my family. Welcome back to Mindful Moments podcast with Dr. Watts, Mental Health Tea with Dr. T. I hope and pray that you all had a wonderful week and enjoying, if you're in the Michigan area, enjoying some of this beautiful sunshine weather. And if not, that you did something for yourself, something that you love to do, something, and I call that self-care, right? So whether that's you going out with a friend, calling a family member, or just kind of chilling at home by yourself, I hope that you did that thing that made you feel good, right? And so I'm super excited. My weekend was very fast, you guys. Y'all know we just like real here, we laid back. And so I had a very fast weekend, I did basketball, AAU stuff with my son all weekend. So, that's great. I always love to see the children doing something productive. And then the parents and the families coming out to support them. So that's always gratifying. It feels good and warms my heart. So today, what I have for you guys is, and y'all know I'm bringing the tea, right? And what we do is talk about how different things that we go through in life or different things that we may experience may impact our mental health. I'm spilling coffee today. I got my coffee with me and I got a guest and I'm just gonna flake it off a little bit, but I needed some coffee, you guys, because it's been a long day. So anyway, we're talking, we like to bring those type of topics to you so that we can dive a little deep. And obviously I can do it, but I know so many wonderful experts in the field to kind of dialogue with, to give you more insights and to make you feel that what you're going through is not, you're not the only person going through what you're going through. And then also to shine the light on how many people can be impacted by the things that they go through, and how it can affect different parts of your body sometimes even, right? And so today what we're going to do is talk about that word grief. And we hear it so very often. Right? What is grief? And identifying that grief looks different for everyone. Okay? So that's one of the key things that I want you to keep with you. And also with grief is not just a thing that you have to go through if someone is deceased or passes away, okay? So keep that in mind. Sometimes you can grieve different situations or matters of friendship, a relationship, right? Loss of a job or transition to a new city or state even, right? So sometimes we grieve certain things, persons, or places as well. So today what we're going to talk about on this topic, and I'm so excited because the guest that I have is just so amazing. And I thought what better person to bring in to talk about this topic with other than a wonderful nurse of many years at this point, has an amazing background. And I'm going to ask her to introduce herself in just a moment. But what better person, right, than a nurse to talk about, right? And here's the topic: how grief can turn into a medical diagnosis, okay, or deficit mentally. And so that's where we're going to kind of dialogue today, right? Grief turned into a physical diagnosis or decline and or a mental deficit, a mental health deficit, right? It all can stimulate right from that grief if you do not know how to properly grieve. So although it looks different for everyone, right, there's still a proper way of how do I do this? And you don't have to do it alone. You do not have to do this thing alone. And so many people feel oh my God, it's one more thing that I have to deal with. So what they do is internalize, right, all of their feelings and their emotions or the things that they don't know how to handle. They kind of try to deal with that themselves too. And they try to figure it out themselves, right? And so we know that here on Mindful Moments podcast that we like to always shine light and reel it all the way back in and say, everything, first of all, has to go through the source. The source is Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior. And everything else falls underneath. And those are what we call resources. Those resources are typically your nurses, your healthcare professionals, whether it's a mental health therapist, your social worker, your advocate, whoever it is. And I always tell you, sometimes it cannot be your friend, right? Okay. I'm going to leave that right there. I'm going to put a pin in it because I'm going to get into it, right? But I have a wonderful guest here today, and I want to just softly introduce her, and then I'm going to turn it over to her, let her introduce herself, tell us where she's from, and her background a little bit as well, and her passion and purpose. So we're going to kind of start off like that. So Amy is her name, and I'm going to let Amy, which is a nurse, go ahead and tell you a little bit about herself.
Hello, I am Amy Marison. I have known Dr. Watts for years. We kind of grew up together in the industry.
I know, I was just going to tell you, don't call me Dr. Watts, but it is, right? I am Dr. Watts now, but when we started out, I was Tareva. I'm still Tareva, but I'm Dr. Watts now.
Yes. So I'm a nurse. I have been in the healthcare field for 20 years now. I basically grew up in the nursing home. My mom had always worked in the nursing home, and so I was exposed to people with dementia and all different sort of mental backgrounds and physical disabilities from a very young age. So my passion was always to help those people that seem to be forgotten by culture or society in some way. How can I serve them? How can I help them? And going into kind of what we're talking about today, over the years, I've seen so many different things in that healthcare field and just relationally how people deal with that grief or don't deal with it. Most importantly is if you don't deal with it, there will be consequences and it will kind of resurface back up. So it's about allowing yourself, giving yourself permission to process it, to prevent it from turning into depression, anxiety, PTSD, or various other mental conditions or even physical conditions. You can get high blood pressure from the stress of trying to process grief and pain alone without talking about it in some sort of healthy way. Therapy is a wonderful option, and if you're not doing that, you still need to process it somehow. So are you journaling? Are you praying? Are you maybe meditating on some scripture that might be related to what happened to you and how you can apply that? But we have to use these coping mechanisms and not allow ourselves to get stuck.
Yes. You're really talking like a therapist right now. I love it. And therapy is a great avenue to take when dealing with grief, right? And sometimes it sounds a little cliche to many people, well, how can talking help me to somebody who knows nothing about me? They get a little swag to it, right? Well, it helps tremendously because you're extracting what you're going through, right? And so as a professional, whether it's a therapist or whomever you go to, right? Their job is to hear you and to meet you right where you are. And in a therapist case, to help you problem solve.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's to help you problem solve. So you're right, you gave coping mechanisms. And she used the lingo that we use here in the therapy world, right? We give you different coping mechanisms such as journaling, such as, maybe and even if you can't write it and you don't feel it, sometimes just kind of push and play on that voice recorder and just talking what you're feeling in the moment. I always tell people there is no proper way of telling me how you feel. Just open up your heart. Right? And if it's one word, if it's just a tear, whatever it is, right? You're going to feel a little bit better after you leave that place or that space of wherever you are to release those things. So I've seen something, Amy. Thank you for that. What I'm going to ask you your purpose. You kind of talked about a little bit. You spoke of it a little bit. Tell me your purpose for this field.
My goal is to help people kind of not stay stuck and to get to feel like they have a place to go to help them. So much in our healthcare system today is about treating disease. My goal would be to prevent those things. What can we do in our lifestyle to prevent those problems before they get there? Or how can we combine Western medicine and the lifestyle changes to have the best quality of life within the diagnosis that you do have? And that's kind of the missing piece in our healthcare system, really, is what can we do, whether it be with our diet, with our exercise, how we move our bodies, with what we take into our body, what we put on our skin. I'm all about my oils and different things that you can use to help manage not just your emotions but your energy levels, your your blood pressure, manage your immune system, those kind of things that we can take control of. But it's not something that your doctor's necessarily going to tell you. And I'm not trying to replace or take the place of any of that, because there's definitely a time and a space for that. But we've missing that piece,
that link
back 50, 70 years ago, when everybody had a family doctor that knew them personally and could pick out all of those things and talk to them about that. Today's medicine is not set up that way. So the doctors can't do those things because they don't know about your life, your stress, your environment. They don't have time to dig into those things. So then somebody else has got to take the time to be that.
Yeah, you're right. Oh, that's like a whole nother. And I wanted to. I was sitting. That was confirmation. You have no idea what God already showed me, like probably 4 minutes ago, where I was just like, oh goodness, God, this person next on the podcast, and now what I realize and what I'm hearing is that it's going to have to be just the more than two of us who deal with autoimmune disease and the impact of it, right? And so what I heard as well was that preventative measure piece.
Yes.
That's good. So. Right. And so even with grief, right, in this perspective of what you just explained, Amy, sometimes doctors and nurses, like, with all due respect, I mean, I have wonderful doctor friends. I have, surgeon friends, all of the things. So please don't take this out of context of what we're speaking about. As a disclaimer, we love you all. However, we know that there can be something else that could be done, right? That can positively work for the individual. And it can be so effective, impactful.
Absolutely.
Right? And so even like where, as it relates to grief, what we're talking about today, sometimes they will just say like, hey, well, and they're empathetic for the most part. If you have a great physician that you've been with for a while. However, we do see it all the time where it's like, all right, well, let's just, read this on grief. And they send you about your way.
Absolutely. Right? And maybe they give you a prescription for a pill.
Correct.
Not that there isn't a time and a place for those pills and they don't help.
Correct.
But not by themselves.
Correct.
You need to process the grief. And if you take, whether it be an anxiolytic or an antidepressant, whatever it is, you're never going to get to the bottom of the grief with just a pill. That's not how it works. You got to do the work.
Yes, you have to do the work.
Process it. And the level of grief that you have for a situation is equal to the amount of love you had for that situation. Whether it be a job, a friendship, a death, anything, the amount of grief you have is equal to the amount that thing was in your life, how much you cared about them, how important that thing was. So everybody has different levels of grief, and we're all probably grieving something at every given moment because life is constantly changing.
Yes, constantly. It's always changing. And you're right? And that's why I love what we're talking about, because it doesn't just relate to the death of an individual that's close to you. It can be a person, place, or thing.
Exactly.
Literally, right? And we know that over the past couple of years, with COVID and all the tragedy that came along with that, people are still grieving, right? Loved ones, husbands, wives, grandparents, children in some cases. And so because of that, it still seems like this revolving door. You know what I mean? That they kind of go around. You know why? I think that society kind of puts a time stamp on it.
Oh, absolutely.
And I'm like, who are we to tell someone how long they can grieve? Right? B, what grief looks like.
Right.
It looks different.
It does. And that's, our culture tries to say, you're allowed this time period. Now it's time to get on with your life.
Yes.
And while we have to
get on,
move forward,
that
doesn't mean that the grief is going to go away.
There you go.
And it doesn't have to. The other thing that society messes up is they think you couldn't possibly be grieving because I saw you laughing today at the park. Yeah,
you're happy. You looked a certain way.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's a perception.
Right. And one of the things, that I have followed Granger Smith, and he had kind of a grief journey.
Okay,
So we were
okay.
sort of involved in that.
Nice.
And one of the things they always say when they're talking about their grief journey is grief and joy can coexist.
Yes.
In society,
Can
culture,
you say that
they
again?
don't talk about that.
Say that again. Grief and joy
and joy
can
coexist.
Coexist. And that co-word means they can work together. You may
At
see
the
them
same
both
time.
present at the
Yeah.
same time, correct?
Right.
So what I always tell people is grief never goes away.
Right.
It'll always be there, right? It's how we handle grief. How do we navigate around it?
Right.
That's what changes.
Yes.
That's what gets better,
It's
right?
just, it's something you carry with you.
Yeah.
And they, Granger and his wife like to say that it gets lighter.
Okay.
It doesn't go away,
Mhm.
but it gets lighter
It gets
as
lighter.
you work through it.
Gets
So it will
lighter.
always be there, but
Yeah.
it might not always feel like a ball and chain
Yeah.
on your neck,
Yeah.
because if you've worked through it,
That's it.
obviously the grief you have
Mm-hmm.
after some distance has passed and some
Yeah.
processing has happened
Yeah.
isn't going to be the same as the grief you felt
Yeah.
that first day.
No,
It's
it gets
still
better.
going to be grief,
That's
but
the
it's not going to
navigation
be
part.
the same.
No, that's the navigation part that I speak about. Right? It's how are you navigating through it?
Exactly.
So when you navigate better through it, then it gets better over time
Exactly.
to cope with. And that's the goal. How am I coping with the grief that I'm
Right.
going through?
Exactly.
Right? I love that. I have to meet this guy.
Yeah.
I say that. I say this all the time, and I know nothing about him. So, but you speak highly of him. So I would love to meet him one day. But it's so cool sometimes how when we, people like us in this field, like when we have to sit down and think about this thing, like what is this? This is this grief word that people use and utilize and sometimes misuse.
Oh, absolutely.
Do you know what I mean? That's another part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, awesome. This is exciting. So, and I know look, that's cliche, right? I'm like, it's exciting. We're talking about grief, but it is because we're giving you a deeper understanding of what it looks like. And hopefully you take these tools in this conversation with you. Okay. So you guys, like, I want to talk about this with y'all family. So I looked at this thing and I looked at what is the best definition of grief? Looked it up and I want to read it.
Okay.
It says the normal response to a major loss. Okay, so we're defining grief in the best way. And y'all can let me know if y'all agree or disagree. If you have an experience that you just kind of want to use this platform and kind of just say, you know what, you appreciated the information or whatever it is after today, please do so. We would love to hear back from you. But back to the definition. The definition, the normal response to a major loss, such as a death of a loved one. Grief may also be felt by a person with a serious long-term illness, which grief turning into that, right? Or with a terminal illness.
Yeah.
That's how bad it can get. It may include feelings of great sadness, anger, guilt, and despair. The 5 stages of grief are typically, you will see this with people, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And the reason that I wanted to highlight the 5 stages of it is because sometimes, which is what we were just talking about, individuals may be stuck in that denial phase for 5 years after that thing that they went through.
Right.
Right? They may struggle tremendously. Well, half the time they struggle in that space because it's like they can't believe they're so devastated, but then they hold on to it and then they haven't reached out for the proper help.
Exactly. It's that releasing it that helps you move through the other stages. And it's not going to be a perfectly linear process where you're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. But the idea is to not stay stuck.
Yes.
And that doesn't mean that there isn't going to be a bad day where you're going to be extra sad on a certain day. But the idea is if every day is still just as sad at 5 years than it was at the first year, then there's something processing that you haven't figured out how to navigate around.
Yeah.
So you need to dig deeper with some professional help to figure out what that thing is and how to process it. We're all going to process things differently. And maybe it's finding a way to honor that thing, that person that you lost, or that thing that changed in your life. Maybe it's that you need to remove some of the constant reminders so that you can think about it in positive light, but not necessarily be reminded every time you wake up or every time you walk into a room, because sometimes those can be triggers for people. So you don't want to
Which can
avoid
also,
it altogether, to repress it.
Yeah.
But you have to find that healthy balance of not constantly
that word.
triggering yourself either.
Yeah, that word right there, the healthy balance,
Yeah.
right? But what you just were explaining to, like in your explanation, was something that can lead to delayed grief.
Yes.
Right? And so delayed grief is a pattern in which symptoms of distress seeking, yearning, etc. occur at a much later time than is typical.
Right.
Okay? Chronic grief, a pattern emphasized prolonged duration of grief symptoms. Distorted grief, a pattern characterized by extremely intense or typical symptoms. So if you don't have those healthy boundaries in place, then it can lead from one level of grief to another level of grief, which is that the last level being distorted grief.
Right.
This grief thing is very, very deep.
It is.
And I don't think that people talk enough about grief. You know what I mean? It's kind of like throwing around an idea of it. And I'm like, let's do some because people are relying upon social media and individuals to give them reliable information. Yeah. Right? And so it makes it that much harder. Grief has many layers. The healing process of grief has many layers and components to it. Thank you. Thank you so much, Amy. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for giving us your insight about grief. It was very helpful. It was very useful and beneficial. It was refreshing just to kind of have that type of conversation. So we thank you for joining us on Mindful Moments podcast. I know the family out there appreciates you as well. And all viewers are family to us here. So we just thank you. And we would love to have you back again to dive a little bit deeper on some of the other topics that God just revealed to me during conversation with you. So I'm pretty sure that this is not the first time that we'll have you on our show, and we welcome you to be a part of our family as well.
Well, thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Yes. And so, hey, you guys out there, I love each of you. Thank you for tuning in again on Mindful Moments podcast. I hope that you were able to take something away, not just for yourself, but that you're able to share it with someone close to you, someone that you love, someone that may be going through a grief of a person, a situation, a place, a thing, a circumstance, a transition. Sometimes grief does not always have to be a bad thing.
Not always. Right?
So sometimes we get a promotion, now I have to grieve, I'm getting this higher paid job, but I miss all my people, right?
Yeah,
the people that I'm used to. Exactly. So I hope that you're able to take something, and more importantly, on the topic of which we were speaking of today, grief turned into a mental deficit, and or a physical decline or diagnoses. Grief can lead to those things, okay? And so we want to act as a preventative measure. We want to give you information. We want to give you resources. And if you have any questions and you're struggling in that space, please reach out. We're always here. I'm always here. My information is always going across at the bottom. And so we would love to have you reach out if needed. We love you. I love you. And I hope that you love you. We'll see you next time on Mindful Moments podcast. Have a great week on purpose.